Hello, and welcome to the Overcoming Podcast with your host, Adriana Lewin. Before we jump into today's episode, if you could please kindly subscribe to this podcast, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram at _Adriana_Lewin. Hello, and welcome to today's Overcoming Podcast episode. I'm excited to bring my next guest. And my next guest, I have to introduce as an old friend of mine from good old Allen High School days. We even went to, I don't know if it was homecoming together in our group or something along those lines, or some sports formal, I don't know. But at one point, I think we were in each other's circle back in high school before she graduated. She was a year older than me. So I'm bringing on our guest, Katie Franks. She is a mom, wife, and a domestic violence survivor advocate. So thank you so much for being my guest today, Katie.
Thank you for having me. I'm pumped.
I am pumped too. I'm pumped to talk about all things really sad, but also inspiring, and, really get into your story, because I have watched your story from afar, as we all do when we've, been on Facebook for as long as we've been.
Yeah.
Since the early days. So, I've kept up with your life, saw you get married, saw you get unmarried.
I like how you put that. I like that.
So you get unmarried, and that didn't, I really appreciated how vulnerable you were with people in the process. And girl, I just gotta say, your story truly is inspirational for all the other women out there who are going to identify with your struggles. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your marriage and getting unmarried?
All right. I will give you the Cliff Notes version, because I think that's what we did in high school. We didn't read the full book.
Right.
But I think that, I was busy with life and I had a job I traveled with. And so I jumped into the world of online dating, and it was great because I didn't have to, find people at the local grocery store or anything, which was good. And we dated for a couple of years, and he did due diligence, asked my dad for my hand in marriage. And, obviously looking on hindsight, there were no red flags, as happens a lot of the time. But I always consider myself pretty grounded in not jumping to conclusions and really asking the questions and getting to know people based on, morals and values that were similar to mine. I grew up in the church, have a large family. We were very established, very, truth telling and all the things, as a family unit. So that was super important to me. And then he proposed, we got married about a year later. In total, we were married 2 years before I left and filed for divorce, and got unmarried. I just love that. I'm gonna use that from now on before I get unmarried. And during that time, we had a miscarriage, and then about 6 months later, we got pregnant with Gabby Lee. And she's my world. She will be 6 in February, which is just crazy to me.
I know.
It goes so fast. You don't think that when they're a newborn, and then, when they get older, it flies. I didn't even realize some of the red flags when, and I call them red flags because that's like a glaringly obvious, okay, this is wrong. And a lot of us don't like to notice those because of one reason or the next. And I'm sure plenty of outsiders saw those, but being within and looking out is a completely different view, right?
Right.
Where if you're outside looking in, you're like, man, that seems off. And then you're in, it's like, it's totally fine. This is normal. So yeah, that's kind of how it got to that point. And then, I think when you're also in it, you don't realize some of the things that are actual abuse. Because when you're watching movies, it's like massive instances where like it's, it's catastrophic, or like I always think of, go to Lifetime where it's a big deal, where I think abuse often starts simple little things and they build and build and build. It's like when you put one brick on top of the other, you don't have a wall to start with, but as soon as you keep building all the bricks, now you're surrounded by this wall. So it was little things that just kept building and building and building. And then finally I was like, whoa, those are really, really big red flags. So, and then they were obviously really big signs. And it took me, I will be honest with you, it took me a while after I got unmarried, and even before I got unmarried, when I was in therapy, to really identify and call them what they were.
Okay.
And call it abuse and call it domestic violence, instead of, oh, that was just, he just chose the wrong words. No, that was verbally abusive. And you don't have to stay for it. You don't have to continue. So I will say it took me a while, and there was still things, that was however many years ago, and there will still be things that I will hear on a show, or someone speaks to me about, and I'll be like, oh, that's indicative. That seems like that could be abusive. And they're like, oh no. And I'm like, and everybody's
Yeah.
different. Yeah. But I think sometimes those things will add up and then be like, oh, yep, that definitely was that type thing.
I've had clients who have been victims of domestic abuse and domestic violence. And oftentimes, even decades later, they'll talk about that relationship and they're like, that's not abuse. Like, I was never punched in the face. Yes. And it's like, okay, well, that is one form of abuse. Let's talk about some of the other forms. And even
absolutely,
if it never escalated to that point because that person got out before, I'm like, there's still a certain level of tactic of intimidation and control that shows up, right? And like, person shook you, like grabbed your arms and shook you. Like, yes, that is actually also classified as a form of domestic violence. And then there's not only like that, right? There's not only the physical side, like you mentioned, the verbal abuse, the psychological abuse. Then some people talk about financial abuse, someone who like completely deprives you of all your money, all the money, the combined household money, and like
spot on
highly controls all of the money going in and out.
Yeah.
Did I cover all of them? I'm like, oh,
yeah.
Emotional. Yeah. Emotional, physical, financial. Yes. All of those. So are you able to talk a little bit about, kind of that when you started dating him, you said you didn't notice the red flags then. Were there any red flags that you were able to identify when you were looking back at that dating time?
Yes, in the way of what I wore. Like in a way where I would go pick out an outfit, put it on, and then be like, oh, I really like that pink shirt better. And that one instance might not, and we'll call it verbal or highly influential abuse.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a word, but that's what it feels like. I really like that pink shirt better. How about you wear the pink shirt? Where the red shirt might have been a little bit too provocative or just didn't sit right, but it was what he wanted when he wanted it and how I was. And so look, that was just one instance. Or what restaurant do you want to go to? I don't know. What are you feeling like? No, you have to make a decision and then get mad at the decision I chose as a restaurant, to therefore be able to do verbal abuse later. And it's like looking back on, you're like, Katie, hello, you're not an idiot, but it's like in it, those seem very trivial. Being like, oh, I like that shirt, where my husband now is like, what shirt do you have? Like, do you even have a pink shirt?
Yeah.
I mean, he's like, oh, you look beautiful, but it's never the hidden agenda. And I think in my experience that a lot of abusers have an agenda with everything.
Mm-hmm.
And big or small, it's let's do this so we can do this so we can do this. And oftentimes it's that building on instances over time. And it's like, ooh. So yes, to answer your question, looking back, I for sure see things and kick
They're
myself in the
like they're like teeny tiny little red flags. And it's one of those that at that moment in time, you're like, well, it's not really a deal breaker, right?
right, right, right,
You're like, okay, maybe he really likes the pink shirt better. It's not a
right.
deal breaker.
Exactly. We go to church, we're saving money, like we're doing this, like we get our families get along great, like all the the check boxes that you make in high school. I want my husband to have all of these, hitting all
Mm-hmm.
those check marks, but then there's this other list and you're that you don't even know about, and you're like, maybe I should be checking that list. Or when something comes up, you're like, oh, I need to remember that. And not to be live in fear or live in like this constant state of everyone's like that, because not everyone is.
Mm-hmm.
But mindfulness and knowing yourself and really knowing what you need, that is where I think you can like deepen that checklist and see if it fits for sure.
So you mentioned you were going to therapy before
Oh,
you got unmarried.
love
So
that. I
I know
love
I'm like, we're gonna go
that.
with unmarried for the rest of this
Write it
episode.
down because I'm going to use it. It's for sure.
So you were going through therapy, you said,
Mhm.
right? Was that
Yeah,
something that you started after you started dating him, or was that something that came because you were with him?
because of him. So I did a lot of therapy back in my high school years when I had so many hip surgeries. So I knew like it's always great to have an outside perspective on your things, because your family's great, your friends are great, but I want somebody who like doesn't know me and could just shoot it to me straight. Like,
Mm-hmm.
am I crazy, or am I just like need to, work on a few things, or what am I not doing? So I start when I knew it was getting bad, and I had that kind of rumbling in my stomach and kind of in my heart. And I'm like, some of this isn't kind of, it's not jiving, like it's not right.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay, maybe we both need to go to therapy. Maybe we can save this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Save maybe shouldn't be used in our everyday language when it comes to anything domestic violence. um, but I started going to therapy just to see if I was the crazy one, because I was getting blamed for a lot. And so I needed someone to say, this isn't your problem, or maybe there's these few ways you can improve, because I feel like we're in a constant state of growth if we're not
Mm-hmm.
growing and learning constantly and learning more about ourselves. I'm 40 and I still don't think I know everything about myself, nor do I want to stop learning. So I think that yes, it was imperative for me to go to therapy. And then I continued all the way through, took forever to get unmarried, and then for several years after that, for sure.
Well, I think it's great that you decided to go and find a neutral party to kind of have these conversations with. And I think oftentimes, even with family members, it's hard to have conversations, right? Like that's what I always tell people. I'm like, you need to go find your own therapist to have conversations with, because I'm family, and no
Mhm.
matter what comes out of my mouth, it's not going to sound the same than coming out of a neutral party who might
Mhm.
say, have you considered that this might be abuse or
Right.
unhealthy or this or that, right? Whatever
Yeah.
it is. I'm like, no matter what I say is never going to land the same way as if you were to go with somebody else who's not in your circle. Because when
For
we
sure.
seek advice from people in our circle, oftentimes I feel like we want to be like, well, you don't know the whole side of the story. Let me just
Oh
tell
yeah.
you, like, this person and this is what happened. And so we do a lot of like justification for other
Yep.
people's behaviors, and we don't want to accept some harsh realities. But when we have someone who's like, this is what this is what it looks like.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, remember that? Let's talk about that again. Like,
Yeah.
when it's repeatedly told to us by a neutral person, then you're like, shoot, maybe they're actually right, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe there's some truth to what they're telling me. And so for you, kudos to you for going to somebody who was like, you know, taking the initiative to go to someone and then being able to have those conversations and taking to heart what they said. Because
Yeah.
oftentimes people who are in a domestic violence situation are afraid to leave,
Yes.
and it may not be that they're afraid to leave because of their personal well-being, like their safety, as much as it is like they might be afraid to leave because they don't believe that they can have better. So the fear of
Absolutely.
the
Oh,
future
yes.
without the person is
Yeah.
more of the fear than the
Oh, yeah.
like the repercussions of it. For some, not all, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
walk me through kind of how you decided, you're like, hey, this is it. I'm done. I'm
Yeah.
walking out.
Yeah. So we had sold our house in Allen, and Gabby was 5 months old, sold our house here in Allen and moved to Oklahoma. Got a home on 32 acres and thought it was the dream. There we were
Mm-hmm.
gonna get cows, like the whole 9 yards. Gabby was gonna grow up on this little ranch, like it's just gonna be awesome. Yeah, okay. No, not awesome. And there were instances, those little, why don't you wear the pink shirt instead of the red shirt, had escalated since Gabby was born. It was not a healthy pregnancy. It was not, I only gained 15 pounds. Like I did not focus on what I needed to be focused on during that time. I was in survival mode every
Mm-hmm.
single day. And even when she was born, I was on survival mode. So we moved. I packed up the whole house by myself, which was great. And then we moved. I was working for a company based out of Memphis at the time, and I had to go there for meetings. And so this was the straw that I was like, whoa, Katie, like this is like the biggest red flag that you can ever imagine. These aren't like
Mm-hmm.
the ones on cupcakes at the grocery store. This is like the most biggest one possible. He said, why don't I drive y'all there? Because I was still breastfeeding, and I was like, okay, we're just gonna make a family trip out of it. It was about 3 days. So we all went, and 15 minutes into my meeting, he was watching our kiddo, and he was like, I can't do it. And I was like, I'm in the middle of a meeting. And mind you, wasn't working at the time. I was the only bringing in, but the financial abuse, what you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't think it was at the time, but looking back, it was one of those things that it definitely was. He's like, I can't do it. So I said, well, come get me and I'll go back to the hotel. So I get her, walk in, everything's thrown apart. He doesn't know how to make a bottle. Like it just is a disaster. And he let out a few very, very harsh words, demanded my rings, and said, I'm leaving. And then flew back to Texas, left me there with a 5-month-old in the middle of corporate meetings with CEOs and,
Wow.
CFOs and all that. This was an hour into a 3-day stint of meetings. And I planned the meetings where they were like an hour and a half, go back, feed Gabby, put her to bed, then go back to meetings. Like I'd strategically planned them all so he would have tons of support. And I looked at him and I said, you do what you want, but I will not be going back to that home when I come back. And I never went back. And I was like, if someone, no matter who it is, if someone can leave you, because we lived in Oklahoma, this is Memphis, Tennessee, we had driven there
Mm-hmm.
7.5 hours. Someone can leave you that says they love you that far away and destroyed a room, throw medicine around, just a disaster. I'm like, we don't need that. We don't need that. It was scary. And it was very like, how am I going to do this? But I knew in that moment, whatever the unknown was better than the known.
Yeah.
Absolutely better. And I was like, this baby girl does not need to be around that. And a lot of people, I talk to a lot of people sometimes say it's better to stay for the kids. And I always challenge that in a really polite way and say, but what are you showing them?
Mm-hmm.
What's acceptable if you stay? And I knew for her that was not acceptable. And I thought, nope. And I never went back. My mom had to fly out and help drive me, and my boss was amazing. And yeah, so that was the straw.
I mean, did you break down like crying and like, were you able to go
No,
back to work?
I did not cry. And I felt this a few times in my life where you have this like, I'm a believer in God, and it was like this supernatural, like you have the full armor right now. You can do this. And so I stood there and I had her away from him, and he packed up his stuff and walked out the door. And I was like, okay, she needs to be fed. So I nursed her, put her down for a nap, called my boss and said, I'll be there at such time. And then once I got to the office and I knew I could pass my kiddo off to an amazing coworker, I was like, just like this babbling, like crybaby. But I knew in that moment I had to have such strength because I didn't know his capabilities, but I knew what I had to do as mom.
Yeah.
And me, domestic abuse survivor as a mom, was way more necessary than me needing to feel the victim. Like I accepted in that moment I was no longer a victim and I was a survivor. Because I had made that choice when he had just completely lost it. I'm like, no, survivor.
Yeah. That's interesting though, because up to that point, were you struggling with the idea whether or not you wanted to leave?
Every single day. I knew it wasn't right. I knew there were so many things that were not right, but the gaslighting, the narcissistic behaviors, the you know, I need you, the love bombing, all of those would like pull me back. And then when like plates of chicken got thrown around the kitchen because I cooked too many carbs, I'm like, okay, but what? And then the love bombing would come back. And so it was just this like tug of war almost. And it's like, Katie, you're smarter than this. But like you said, some people, it takes several times for people to leave. And I'd say to my mom and dad all the time, I'd rather been punched in the nose than go through some of the verbal and emotional abuse that I did. And I think that might be easy for me to say because I didn't experience that kind of physical abuse. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I'm like, the emotional turmoil, because I'm an empath, I'm like, hey, sweetie, let's sit down. Let's talk about that. Like, I'm really that kind of person. And so I would do that. And then I'd be like, oh, there goes the chicken. You know what I mean? Like, and so it was just a weird, but yes, I struggled every day. Really, I kind of felt like it was a couple months before we had moved to Oklahoma that it was really just like things that aren't right. You know, and then when you add a kid, it just escalates it. Because when it's just adults, it's easier to like stomach almost, I think. But when you add kids, now you're responsible for somebody else.
Yeah.
And they're watching you. So, you know, yeah, they're watching you.
Did you ever feel like you were unsafe, like fear for your physical well-being?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's, this isn't facts, but there, I mean, I think that there was a purpose that we moved to the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma, on 32 acres.
What was the purpose?
Have you seen any Lifetime Movie Network movies?
I stopped watching Lifetime for a reason.
Good for you. Good for you. I keep waiting for them to reach out and be like, Katie, we want your story. I'm like, which story? I have a lot of them. In Memphis, I did. He was just irrational so many times. And then post unmarried, I've had TROs, I've had protective orders, like I've had all those multiple times. So yes, I absolutely have. And ironically, post unmarried has probably been more of those moments than actually being married.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So you're still dealing with the chaos of it
every single day. But I will tell you, because I have done so much therapy and so much work internally, externally with my family unit, that the impact is obviously way less. And I've stayed in that survivor mode, not victim mode. Now, there are moments when, you know, a scary man knocks on your door and serves you with papers. It's like, ugh, and you crouch down and you just become this like shell of a Katie. And then I'm like, no, this is, put that in the box. That's signed, sealed, delivered to somebody else. Like, this is where we're at. And this is the power we're walking in, which takes a lot of mental.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Work.
It seems like it would feel like always looking over your shoulder, kind of like what's coming next. Am I, you know, it's
when's the next shoe gonna drop? Like,
yeah.
when's the next email gonna come through, or text, or when's the attorney gonna reach out, or, and I had to do some major mental growth on that too, to change the dialogue, not when is it going to happen? It's going to happen. So, and I think because we have this kiddo that we share, really technically it could happen for the rest of our lives. So it could, the intensity changes, but because we share a kiddo, it's indefinite.
Oh man, that sounds awful. I'm sorry, I'm laughing because you're
No,
laughing.
it's okay. Hey, you gotta laugh to keep from crying sometimes. It's good.
But that sounds
I will
awful.
say to some people listening, like, because find hope in that even if you do get unmarried, it might still happen, and things still might come up, but they are way less impactful, or way less dampen your spirit when you take control of what you want your life to look like, rather than my dad always says, let's go on the offense. Like, we grew up in sports. I was an athletic trainer. So he's like, hey, we got to get back on the offense. Like, we're stop playing defense. And it's so true. Like, we're an offensive team. Like, I'm quarterback. Like, I'm not the safety trying to catch up. Like, quarterback, let's go, so yeah.
I've had clients in similar situations where they're dealing with co-parenting with a very toxic ex, right? And it's been a challenge, right? And it's interesting. Well, in certain ones, there's more family dynamics at play too. So it's not just the spouse, it's like extended family too.
Yeah.
And seeing how much progress that some of my clients have made through doing things like EMDR. I don't know if you've done EMDR or have heard of it.
I've heard of it, but haven't.
Well, you and I will have to have a sidebar conversation on that,
Okay.
because it
Noted,
is
write it down.
amazing. But I've seen how powerful it has been with my clients who are kind of, they do share kids, and it's this very long-term interaction required with that toxic ex, and learning to navigate that and the feelings that come up with it. They have found themselves less emotionally responsive to some of those tactics that come into play.
Oh yeah.
The control and manipulation and all that stuff that happens in those dynamics. They have found themselves less reactive to it. So I have seen people who, to be a little more like hopeful, because yes, it is terrible, and I've seen other people go through it, but I have also seen people learn how to navigate that with such grace. Absolutely. To the point where it's like, I got this. That doesn't bother me anymore. I expect that behavior.
Yeah.
I've got this.
Yep. Absolutely.
So on that note, he leaves and you're left with like, okay, well, he kind of made it easy for you. He actually left, right? He left. I don't think he was leaving the marriage, but he left. And you were like, okay, bye.
A Freudian slip, or whatever you call that, where it's like, oh, that's not what I meant, but oh, that's what actually happened. Like,
yeah. So
he pieced out for real.
Yeah. He's like, wait, hold on. You're not coming back home. What do you mean? Right. Which it's interesting. We didn't answer the question. I'm wondering, whose idea was it to move to Oklahoma? Was it your idea or his idea?
I'm using air quotes. We couldn't find a home in Allen that would work. And I'm like, so we went from over by the Lowry Center, a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house with no acres. Like, it was a normal neighborhood, to 32 acres, which we had no business. Like 2 ponds, like cows from the neighbor coming up. I mean, I am not a homestead girl. So like, I don't know. I knew how to grow jalapenos from a bush and a plant. Like, I don't know how to like move some cows. Like, it's definitely his. And I was very like, the idea was appealing to me, but not to move to a I think population was like 604 and we made it 607. Like we're talking small town. So, but it was about an hour and 10 minutes from all my family. And I think that getting further away from the family was, a thing.
It is a thing. And I think that's a thing that often people don't recognize, that people, now I don't know him, so I'm going to
project it on him.
No, I'm going to repeat your words with narcissistic tendencies.
Yes.
People that may have some narcissistic traits have a tendency to isolate the person.
Without a doubt.
It starts with isolating them from their friends, then it's the family, and well, I don't feel comfortable going around your family. Right? So I see you touching your nose over there.
Spot on. And then we had no cell service.
No cell service.
This is becoming more and more like the TV channel. Like, I'm kidding, but not.
This is like not even a red flag. He's literally like creating this huge banner. It's
the plane that's pulling the message. Like, Katie, what are you doing? Like, wow. And then my family's like, duh. And it's like, oh, but I wanted to mention this point when you were talking about the therapist and seeking someone outside. I was more willing to talk to that stranger because I didn't know him prior to therapy, about the ugly things that were said and done more than I told my family. We are nip and tuck, all of our family. But there were so many things that were just hideous and horrible that no one needs to know about, that I was able to tell that therapist. So that's another reason why I'm a huge advocate for finding someone outside and a therapist, because they're able to take that information, digest it, and help you process it. Because your family's just going to instantly want to love on you when it's like, no, that was really bad. How do I process that? And they're like, oh, we love you. I'm so sorry that happened. It's like, I need that, but I also need, how do you process that? So I just wanted to touch on that too, going backwards.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a really valid point, because your family, right? They're not only going to love on you, some of them are just going to, I know some people would be like, you gotta leave him, leave his ass. Like, he is no good. Right. And then you find yourself, if you're not ready, if you,
oh yeah, for sure,
emotionally not ready, financially not ready, if you fear for your life, then you're sitting here trying to navigate the combination of, what's the word? Not combination.
Their added feelings and thoughts and pressure onto your already own. It's like, I know I'm trying to figure this out. And now you have like this whole clump. It's like more on top of more. And it's like, I know it's bad, but you have to figure out, because it is a lot. The thought of leaving, even if like that moment in Memphis when I was standing in the La Quinta and I said, I am done. And I was thinking, okay, I need to get through the next 24 hours, actually the next 12 hours. Like, what am I going to do? I have to go back to work. Like, what do I need to do? Thinking on a big scale, how am I going to provide for myself? Especially if people don't have a job. There's a lot of stay-at-home moms who don't have a job. So it's like, how do I do that? How do I manage the kids? Where do I live? What, is he going to take everything? Is he going to liquidate stuff? And then attorneys are a fortune, rightfully so, because they're phenomenal professionals, but it's on and on and on. And all of those thoughts will instantly paralyze you.
Yep.
And then it goes back to, is it better just to stay? And I will forever say, no, it's not. But the logistics are very hard to justify the leaving sometimes. So, because not everybody has a mom and dad, like I could go live with them for 4 months before I mean, I talk to women all the time who are like, I don't even know where I would buy diapers. And it's like, you're worried about $27, and that $27 seems like 27 million, Powerball, people don't win Powerball all the time. So it's daunting for sure. That's sidebar, but that's
yeah. And the families or the people who are afraid to leave might also feel, or when they're in that dynamic where it's like family starts to say, you need to leave him, he's no good. Some people might feel the need to actually defend the other person. Well, maybe it's not that bad. It's really not as bad as you guys think it is. And so then you begin to isolate yourself even further from your
Yeah.
family because
You
they
don't have
don't
to
understand.
explain.
Yeah. You
No,
don't have
you
to
don't.
explain.
You're already emotionally drained. I was already a shell of a Katie. I don't want to have to explain one more time why we had to leave early because he got annoyed with the sauce on the hamburger. Like, you don't have to explain that over and over again because it's tiring. And it's, yeah.
Yep.
You think of things come back and you're like, oh yeah, we really did have an issue with sauce and hamburger. And it's like, it's so trivial. It's like the pink shirt. And you're like, oh gosh.
We're leaving a restaurant because of the sauce on a hamburger.
I mean, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, this is what we're doing.
This is what we're doing. Yes.
Let's just get home before anything crazy happens.
Adding this to the bucket of the red list flags of like, what is going on here? Like the perception of reality is insane, right? Like,
And the amount of times that I said sorry.
mm,
Like it took me probably a good 9-10 months to realize that 99% of the times I said sorry were completely unnecessary. Because it's the
yeah.
instant, well, if I say sorry, it'll end the conversation. We can move on quicker. And it's like, it was sauce on a hamburger that I literally had no control over. Like, I don't need to say sorry for that. In fact, you asked for the sauce and then changed your mind when it came to the table. So
Your reality, like, so I've had friends who I was essentially their sounding board through some of their domestic violence that never really got physical either. And the common theme that I would hear from them was often like, it can't be that bad. I took a break. I was separated for a little bit. And in their mind, their reality is like, well, it couldn't have been that bad. There's no way, right? Like maybe I'm making a bigger deal out of this than it actually is. And then they'd go back to the relationship, co-live again for a while. And then it was like, oh my gosh, this is really that bad. And then they'd leave and start that cycle again. Well, it couldn't have been that bad. And so it's like their perception of reality is so skewed because they're
absolutely
constantly questioning their own reality. Like, is it me? Is it my fault? Like, is it that bad? Maybe if I did this different, it would be better, happier.
yeah. Yeah. Maybe if I vacuumed the lines in the carpet the other way, it would be better.
Oh, Katie.
I kid you not, looking back on some of the stuff, I'm just like, what? And again, like, I'm a very strong person. And I mean, I've been through some, like, outside of this whole shenanigans, being unmarried, like, I've dealt with a lot of things in my life. I'm like, but how did this slip through? Like, how?
Yeah.
But it's the little bricks that keep building the wall before you know it. That's just, it can be catastrophic. And I will be forever grateful that whatever happened that day in Memphis did, that I could realize like this can become catastrophic. So make the decision. Like, he took the rings, so you made the choice, dude. Boy, bye.
If you are in this situation like this, right? For the listeners, there are several locations in major cities that help families leave a home where there is domestic violence. And remember, domestic violence isn't just getting beat up. It's not
Right.
the physical side of it. There is that verbal side. There's when your significant other is isolating you from other people and you find yourself like almost without friends because that's the dynamic that person, your abuser, was able to get you into, right? Because
Yeah.
he doesn't like that friend or he doesn't feel comfortable around the family, or
Yes.
right, like all the things, all the reasons that you avoid hanging out with your friends together as a couple, or even on your own, because, oh, why are you going out with that friend? I don't like that
Right.
friend, right? Like when there is that much control on who you're friends with, how your money is being run, your
Yep.
emotional well-being, like it doesn't hurt to call a location. I know here in the DFW, um, Hope's Door is one, I
Yep.
believe. And there are several other locations that actually their primary focus is, let's just open the conversation. Do you
Yeah.
think you're a domestic violence um, victim, essentially, right?
Mhm.
Let's meet with a counselor. And a lot of those places offer free counseling, right? So
Absolutely.
you don't even have to worry about the financial aspect. You don't have to leave a paper trail. So if you
Yeah.
are being financially abused or being heavily monitored and controlled, then you're at least able to talk to someone free and
Yeah.
confidentially about your situation, to just get a temperature, a gauge of,
Yeah.
is your reality valid for you? Like, does it, if it feels
Absolutely.
off, maybe it is off,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Like, if it
And
feels off, then maybe it is.
yeah, if anything feels off, I mean, I truly believe as women, we were given that intuition, and it, it gives you that little like cringy. It's like, I don't do haunted houses, but it's that first moment when you're driving up and you like get there and it's like a haunted house. You kind of get your like skin starts to crawl. It's, I think that if you ever have any of those moments in any situation, and when you're talking about, it can be someone you met on a first date, it can be a conversation that you have via text message. If you're ever feeling like you have any of those inklings that something's off, talk to someone, especially someone who, like you said, Hope Store and all that, who this is what they do. This is they're familiar with it, and they have a lot of tools in their tool belt to help kind of navigate those first, because it is scary. But it's also, I think, you find such hope and relief in talking about it. And I think that's a lot of times why I talk about it on my social media, is because I don't ever want someone to feel alone, or someone stay longer than they want to because they didn't have hope that they could get out,
Yeah.
and they didn't feel like there was any way to navigate that. um and I mean, if you have that feeling, then it's just it's easier to talk to someone than just keep it all in. I waited, I will say I waited too long to talk to someone because I was in denial about it for sure.
Yeah. I feel like that's a common,
Well, you want it to be okay. You spent all
yeah.
the money on the wedding, you dated, he checked all the boxes, he checked a few red flag boxes you didn't know about, but he checked all the boxes, and you're like, and you don't want to disappoint. Like, your friends and family were there to witness the wedding, and you don't want to disappoint. And how's this, going to look on your family? Your safety and your stamina and who you are as a person will go above and beyond any of the, how is this going to look on my family.
Yeah.
I rather have my daughter, when she's however old, show up at my doorstep than show up in a coffin. Like, I just, no matter for what reason, you know so for sure, talk to someone, no
Yeah.
matter how big or small it feels to you. Because if I would have said the small stuff, we might not have ever gotten to Memphis.
Yeah. I'm sure there was a lot of lead up to the moment that he decided, this is too much for me. And
Absolutely.
I know there's probably a lot more behind that story than you can fully disclose,
For
because
sure. There always is.
yes, because again, when you're in this situation where you share kids, it often unfortunately gets, the control becomes, like your child becomes the pawn, basically,
Yeah.
like the way to access control and get, that manipulation through there.
Yeah.
So, oh man, I was going to say something. You were talking about red flags, being in a relationship, and the thought has honestly slipped my mind. So I had this little afterthought that I was like, I need to ask her that. But I think really, when you're in if you're in a situation like that, and if it feels crazy, if it doesn't feel right, listen to your intuition, listen
Yeah.
to that gut. And if it's hard for you to trust your gut, then you have to find someone else. Because time and time again, I've seen women in your situation leave their their significant other, because it's not always a spouse, right? It's a
Right.
significant
Oh,
other,
yeah. Yes.
um, leave and build a better life for themselves.
Absolutely.
There are obviously situations where that might be a little more terrifying, but that is why there are certain organizations dedicated to this, such as Hope Store and DFW. And I'm 100% positive that it's all over. I actually, at the end of the show, I will share some hotline information if you find that you might feel like a victim. And remember that, like, it's okay to ask for help, and that disappointment of letting down, everybody else around you because you're leaving, it makes it, there's a lot of fear in becoming this, the stigma of like, oh, I failed at a marriage, or whatever else comes up, right? I can't do this on my own. All these fears that come into play that are binding you, keeping you
Mhm.
stuck, which will only create further anxiety, further depression, further fear,
Oh, yeah.
until you can't take it anymore. And when then there's kids involved, they see the
Yeah.
dynamics, and they will it's a two-sided thing. They will either take a look at it and say, I will never allow myself to be in that situation like this,
Mm-hmm.
or they end up falling into a similar pattern,
Yeah.
without
Well,
even
the cycle
knowing.
continues, and that's
Yeah.
just, I always talk about how it's me and her father don't co-parent, we parallel parent.
Mhm.
And we, which he has supervised visitation, so it's a little bit different. But it when you have a child, and even if you don't, even if you have a pet, you're responsible for that, and you're responsible until they can become responsible for themselves. And I think in any situation like this, it's just always kind of jump in their shoes and think, how would this affect them? Like, what's acceptable? What do you want them to accept later on in life if they were in the situation? Or, and another thing that I always do, and this kind of goes back to if something feels off, if you're feeling something, look in the mirror, act like it's your best friend that you're looking at, and tell them the story that just happened. If they would say to you, hey, that kind of doesn't sound right, that kind of sounds like it was a little abusive. But if you were to repeat what experience or what thoughts that they just, your abuser told you, if you feel, if your best friend would be like, hey, that's probably not right, then it's probably not right. Because that's what I do a lot of times. And when I was in the marriage, I would be like, I'd act like I was my best friend and tell myself the story, and I'd be like, okay, that's not right. Like, I would tell my best friend she needs to leave. Like, I would have this whole dialogue because I wasn't comfortable enough to tell outside my circle. So I talk to myself. It's completely okay.
In the mirror,
In the mirror.
okay.
You're like, that's a completely different session that we're
I
going to talk
know.
about after this. And now we have two sidebars. Perfect. Okay. When did you stop going to therapy,
I
Katie? Maybe
know.
we can go back.
Yes, exactly. Ding, 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 ding. Just kidding. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I do think that I loved, though, that you were able to get out. And yes, you're still dealing with it to this day, with little things that pop up here and there, because of course they will always want to be, asserting their control in scenarios like this.
I always say I'm not even that cool. Like, I just let it go. I'm not that cool.
It is to him, though.
I know. It's because I talk
Um,
to myself. Maybe that's what he likes.
exactly, exactly. So you did go on to have a new relationship,
Mhm.
and kind of give us a little inspiration there. Like, was it hard for you to start dating again? And maybe how some of those fears kind of showed up in the relationship?
Yeah. Um, I went back to online dating because why? Because it worked out great the first time. So why not go
Exactly.
this time? Katie, did you learn anything from this unmarriage? It took me a while. Gabby was about 2 or so. And the unmarriage took about 11 months. So it took a long time. So I was, when you're in that situation, you're like, the marriage is just crumbling. So you're just like, okay, it's dissolving like a
Yeah.
bath bomb, like it's dissolving. And so by the time it was done, I was like, whoa, I'm done. Like, shit
Yes.
things, we're moving on. Still continued therapy because I was like, I knew there was a lot of things. And I think one of the worst things that I could have done is jumped into something right away as a shell of a person. I didn't even know who I was. I didn't know what kind of clothes I wanted to wear because he was buying clothes the same place you bought deer corn. Like, it was just.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah. So like, I got rid of half my clothes because I would have never worn those. Like, I just was like, I need to figure out who I am. Do I like wearing pink? Do I like wearing red? How do I want my hair? Because my hair was short and black, which is not a thing for me, but it was in that situation. So I really head to toe, what do I want to be? And then as I found that, I was like, now I'm a shell of a person. So now I need to work on myself. So I committed to my health and fitness journey, committed to my nutrition, and was like, okay, we have a 7-month-old. Now let's go forward. I finally got to the place where I was like, now I'm a single mom and I'm an ex-wife. And now I want to be a girlfriend. So I got to that point where I was like, I'm ready. So then, you go online and you like, check all the boxes of what you want. It's like, you're at Chipotle and you're checking the boxes, or more like a which you're checking the boxes on the paper. And so you're checking everything, and I'm like, kids, sure, divorce, sure. Like, but I knew, I'm like, I don't want somebody who has dependencies on alcohol or drugs. There was obviously key defining moments that I was like, I don't want that. And I was on Match.com, I think eHarmony or Match.com, I don't remember, for one day. One. And I signed up after I had taken Gabby to spend the weekend away. I had signed up and met the love of my life. And I was very upfront and honest about everything. Like within like 24 hours, he was probably like on information overload and was like, man, she is a box of tricks with all of her drama. So I really want to do this. But I felt it was so important to tell him where I came from. And as triggers came up, because naturally they do, because you don't know they're a trigger until they like smack you in the face. And then it's like the wrong time, like just completely wrong time. But what was so great about my husband, Matt, is he talked them through with me from start to finish. Like, how, like, are you okay? Are you safe? Like, do we need to go back home? Like if we were out, or like how to make you feel, and like truly talked it all the way through. So that way I felt comfortable. And even he continues to that, especially if we have something come up with court, he'll be like, do we need a moment? Do you need a mom moment to step away? Like just truly being completely open and honest was the only way that I knew I could step into that phase of dating again. Because I knew that if I were to hide certain things, and between the therapist and him and my abuser, they're the only three that know the really ugly things that happen. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
You were able to connect with someone. And
yes.
the thing is, like you said, it's important to know, like when you would have a trigger, a lot of people don't realize they are triggers. So they may want to either take off fleeing, like that person is not safe. Yeah. Now I feel unsafe because of the situation that reminds me of something else. But that may not even be the reality. It may just be something from your past that's getting brought up into the present, Yeah. But being able to work through that with your therapist is really awesome, because now I see that you are happily married and you have a baby on the way, and it's not how you expected to get here, right? But it seems it seems like you have found the person who is willing to go along the ride with you
Yeah.
and support you, knowing like you got someone in the background that's a little bit
Well, and
dramatic.
I gave him an out. About maybe like 7 months in us dating, Gabby was absconded to Oklahoma and we had to go get her. And on the way to go get her with my parents, I looked at him and said, there will be no hard feelings if this is too much for you. You can walk away at any time, because I knew that I came with like massive like boulders of drama. So I knew that like it was a lot for me to carry. So I knew it would be a lot for a partner to carry as well, because you're a team. And I remember distinctly looking at him and be like, if this is too much for you, no hard feelings. I completely understand. And he was like, I am in this forever. And that's when I knew, I'm like, okay, I can like, he will be here forever because he's completely okay with it. And he's a go-getter anyway. So he probably was like, man, game on, let's go. But yeah, I think being open and honest and being willing to be vulnerable again. I think, especially as women, sometimes it's very hard to be vulnerable and put yourself out there, but not too many rewards come without some sort of risk. And
so true.
But I did a lot of healing and a lot of internal growth and finding out who I was. So then I wasn't showing up as like the Katie in pink or the Katie in red, or, I was the grounded, the person, I knew what I wanted, rather than just jumping back into a relationship and being like, who am I again? Do I want to go back to Oklahoma? Like
I love that you did work in therapy, but you were also doing a lot of reading on your own, because there's one thing to show up to therapy and just do the talking.
Yeah.
Then there's another to actually read and grow from some of the stuff that you would read. And I found that really inspirational. Hence the reason why I was like, I have to have you come on here and talk about your story, because you're going to inspire someone. And I hope that you do. And I hope that you continue advocating online for all the other people who are stuck in a domestic violence situation. Yeah, again, I hate the word domestic violence, because violence, it implies violence, but
it's intense. And that's like, I think back to our point in the very beginning, a lot of people don't label it as that.
Yeah.
But it is.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes if the word victim is immediately associated with violence, as it should be. Like if you do experience violence, you are a victim, but it's good to know that you can instantly become a survivor too. Like you don't have to stay. And my therapist was like, you don't have to stay in the victim. You can move to survivor whenever you want. And he's like, every day you work towards becoming who you want to be, you're one more step closer to survivor. So
I love that. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for sharing your story and for inspiring the listeners. I also want to share the National Domestic Violence Hotline. If you find yourself in the situation, call 800-799-7233, or you can send a text message to text start, to the number 88788. Those are places that you can reach out and get local information for resources to help you get moving. And hopefully you find the courage and the therapist who will help empower you to continue doing that work, so that you don't feel stuck, and that you start freeing yourself from the situation that you find yourself in. So thank you again, Katie, for sharing your story.
Thank you.
And I will place all the information on how to get a hold of Katie. If you ever want to ask her a question, she is on Instagram, and it's at Katie. Is it Katie Franks?
The Katie Franks. The Katie Franks.
At the Katie Franks on Instagram. And then also I'll make sure and put those in the show notes, and just for anything else, I'll list them in the show notes. Thank you all for listening in today.